Hey, everybody. JJ Cooper and Alex Speier today on another of the Baseball America Prospect Podcast Deep Dives. And if you follow the Boston Red Sox at all, I think that you're going to have a pretty good idea what's going on here, who we're going to talk about if you see Alex on the pod. I think we did this about this time last year, Alex. It's always good to talk to you. You're getting ready to head down to spring training, but before you do, we're going to talk Red Sox prospects. Coming off of a very interesting season where we saw Roman Anthony obviously emerge as a big leaguer and someone who looks like he can be a big league star. And then at the end of the year, Payton Tolle comes up, who is number one in the system. Great to see you. How are you doing? And how has your offseason been as you get ready to ramp it up for another MLB season?
Yeah, well, it's the off season is one that certainly keeps you busy. This has been an interesting one from the Red Sox perspective in that they're so trade heavy right now. And so we both lived through this with the top 10 of the Red Sox system having to be reshuffled as they think about not only how to use their top prospects in order to be able to reinforce the big league team, but also reshape different aspects of their minor league team. It's been a fascinating offseason for them in many respects, and yeah, but I'm excited to see players on the field again. That's always, kind of the joy of the job, right?
It is. And you hit on that one thing before we kind of dive further in. I do kind of find interesting about this is part of that is by where this team is now, finally, is that, this is the team that went to the playoffs last year that is about contention now, not building for some future down the road. But on top of that, when you look at it, another reality of this is that if everything goes the way the Red Sox want, there just aren't that many openings. There aren't that many spots where you're saying, okay, this prospect's going to step up. Some of the trades we saw, like seeing, the past where Josh Nixon Garcia being traded to the Pirates is in part where it's like, if you've got a guy who's at AAA, who's basically big league ready, and you look at it and say, well, I don't think he's going to make our roster, then it's probably smart to move a guy like that now rather than let him spend year 2 in AAA and maybe start to lose a little bit of that prospect value. Maybe you get some depth down the road, but they've been having moves like that, it seems like, in some cases.
Yeah, there's been a much more intentional approach to kind of leveling out areas of organizational surplus and in trying to address areas of organizational deficiency, or in this case, building a surplus in a different area, because what the Red Sox have been incredibly focused on since Craig Breslow came over as chief baseball officer was taking a farm system that was rich in position playing prospects, where that was the obvious strength of their organization, and trying to balance that out with enough starting pitching and enough high-end starting pitching, both established big leaguers and kind of young promising prospects, that they have the ability to withstand the proverbial attrition of the season. So to think about how drastically the organization has changed in terms of its strengths on a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year basis is pretty striking.
Along those lines, I do find it kind of that really kind of started even, I guess, last year, we could say, because last year was the Garrett Crochet trade, when we were also remaking the top 10 and the top 30 over and over. Like, you had the Garrett Crochet trade last year. This year we've seen multiple moves, but that ties in to the number one prospect on the Red Sox system. Payton Tolle, number one. Coming out of the 2025 season, it would have seemed logical to expect, off the fine work he had, okay, this is someone who's going to be in their opening day rotation in 2026. Here we are, and barring injury, it looks like he's ticketed to head back to Worcester to start the year, is he not?
I think that's an extremely high likelihood. And it's interesting because Tolle is someone who traveled kind of the same, like that same blitzing through the minors path that we saw in a Trey Savage, right? But with the difference being that Savage had multiple pitches that that were really weapons in the strike zone. At the major league level, obviously success followed Trey Savage into that starting pitcher role in the big leagues. Whereas for Payton Tolle, he dominated in a way that I don't think anyone expected across multiple levels of the minors. He just, he was just kind of an avalanche going downhill over the course of the 2025 season, where it was like, oh, he's punching out a lot of people in high A and in double A and in a few triple A starts. And then that very impressive body of work did not translate at the big league level because he just didn't have feel for his secondaries once he got up there, right? Like he had a wonderful major league debut in which he was able to overpower the Pirates lineup, largely on the strength of that high 90s heater with a lot of adrenaline behind it in that major league debut.
And the Pirates lineup. You hit a key one there also. The Pirates lineup, which will not compare with the Dodgers or the Yankees or several other teams as lineups that you're really worried about. How do you turn this over?
Or the Diamondbacks, against whom he made his second big league start, and they were just sitting fastball, and he wasn't able to execute anything else in the zone. Even though, I'm not sure if you got to see him, JJ. I think you did at some point over the course of the 2025 season. I got a great look at him in AAA right in his last start before he got called up, and he was executing the whole shebang, right? Like he looked really impressive in a way that he was carving up the strike zone against, I think, a pretty advanced AAA team in Buffalo. He was landing his slider and he was landing his sweeper and he was executing a changeup just below the bottom of the zone. And the AAA lineup looked overmatched against the full arsenal, but he didn't have feel for it once he got to the big leagues. And so right now, Payton Tolle is trying to show that he's going to be in a position. He has to establish himself in AAA. The Red Sox have an opportunity to let him reestablish himself in AAA. This is the whole arsenal. It's not just going to be fastball only. And if he's that guy, if he is able to land a lot of different stuff, a lot of different weapons in the strike zone, then you're looking at a mid-rotation starter. But they don't need to rush that equation and have him, and have him get his brains beaten out if he's only a one-pitch pitcher at the beginning of 2026.
He, to me, is one of the guys I'm most interested to see when we get to spring training. I mean, there's parts of spring training that are noise and there's parts of it that are signal. And when you're talking to Payton Tolle, and I'm reading those stories not long from now, and he's talking about what he did over the offseason to work on his secondaries and things like that, that's going to be fun to watch in March to see kind of how he's developing that way. It does kind of strike me, him and Connolly Early, who also was a guy who kind of rocketed up last year. Pair of guys who now seem to have a little bit more time to develop because, again, the depth of this rotation now was Tolle like the slam dunk, like, okay, this is obviously number one, or was there any like, okay, maybe it's Franklin Arias again, early, Kyson Witherspoon was our first round pick. Connolly Early had a very good year. This is very starter-ish, although not with the same quality of fastball. Was Tolle the clear number one to you as you kind of did your reporting?
There was some conversation about Tolle versus Arias. I think that Arias had his backers, but ultimately, I thought that the industry value seemed to be pretty clear. There was a pretty strong consensus around the game about Tolle carrying more value right now. Arias being someone who's further off. He's someone who, as a teenager, so super impressive, super fast track in his own right, reached Double-A at the end of last year. And you're still waiting to see some tools develop in a way like whereas Tolle at least flashed everything, right? Like he flashed everything that you would need for a mid-rotation starter. Arias is still if he develops another half grade to a grade of power, then you're talking about someone whose profile would really put him as a slam dunk to be, an above average everyday shortstop as opposed to an average everyday shortstop. He's a guy with a great floor for considering that he was only 19 in Double-A last year because the defense is so good, because the bat to ball is so good. But you're waiting for that clear view of impact to crystallize. Whereas with Tolle, it was there. And so there was conversation, but I think ultimately there was a clear lean, a strong lean in the conversation. I'll say it was clearer for Tolle over Arias than it was a year ago with Roman Anthony versus Christian Campbell, for instance, which is wild to think about.
It is wild now, but at the time, yeah. I mean, it was Christian Campbell had such a season in 24. With Arias, the thing I do find fascinating there is I think 10, 15 years ago, Franklin Arias would not be appreciated the same way. And the reason I say that is that he doesn't run all that well. And it used to be that kind of there was an adage that if you're especially at his age, if you can't, if you don't have that plus speed or above average speed, okay, well then are you going to have the range to be a shortstop? I feel like over the last decade, we've seen like these bigger shortstop. Corey Seager didn't run all that well. There's a number of shortstops who have not run all that well and been quite good at shortstop. Arias, like you said, it's not the physical. He's not the physical monster. It's more of kind of that the skills are so advanced at a very young age, isn't it? Like it's something where for a teenager, the bat to ball skills, the understanding of how to do everything defensively and then execute it. It's kind of those skill components of it are so advanced and the tools are solid, as opposed to we've seen a lot of guys over the years where it's like, okay, the 19-year-old who the tools are amazing. And it's like, well, but we got to see, can he learn how to hit, which pitches to hit, make contact? Can he tone all these things down? Arias kind of is really advanced in some of those aspects, isn't he?
Yeah, he's game feel over like explosiveness, right? And so it's interesting at any given point in time how much those two things are valued, and we've become like the industry has become better at quantifying the game feel part of things, right? In terms of being able to measure out conversion and being able to quantify reaction time and and how that plays into range and that sort of thing, in order to appreciate someone who, despite, as you rightly point out, this is someone who already is, he is not even a 50 runner. He's a 20-year-old who is who's like, maybe scraping 45 as a runner right now, and it's probably going to tick down. But just does such a good job of having feel for the game that that his defense plays well above that, and the industry has progressed to the point where there's an opportunity to believe in that as a kind of sticky skill set, rather than thinking like, oh, he managed to get to some balls, but he's not fast enough to keep doing that. Well, we now are able to view things differently, and I just think that you learn so much watching players in games. This is what why it's still great to have scouts. Like clock is such a powerful thing, and it is so, particularly for an infielder, like just that internal instinctive clock for to be moving to have a lean at the point of contact, right? And to know where the ball is going to be going based on understanding pitch types and pitch locations and all of that stuff, and picking up like swing paths and the whole shebang. It really is striking to see the defenders who excel at just being able to read the game and what's in front of them. And it's interesting too, because like Arias is probably viewed as a better defensive shortstop prospect than Marcelo Meyer. But Marcelo Meyer's gifts are also that just wonderful game clock, the ability to anticipate, the ability to remain calm and have wonderful quick reaction times in those kind of magic hands that are able to be, to serve the role of prestidigitator when it comes to those infield smashes, which is why he looked so natural at third base last year, because he's just able to to just do the kind of Mr. Miyagi thing with his glove, and it's super fun to watch.
Okay. I will just start by saying the Red Sox system is clearly, as a farm system, worse than it was last year. That's no knock. Roman Anthony was our top prospect in the game at this time last year. Christian Campbell was a top 10 prospect as well. You graduate those, you're not going to be at the same level. It's still a system with multiple top 100 prospects. But I will even phrase this a little different. Instead of saying, is this better or worse than last year? How much has it changed? How much has it taken a hit? Not just from graduations, but like you said, there's kind of been a rebalancing of this farm system as well. Has there not?
I don't know that I've, JJ, you guys have had me doing the top 10 list for, I think this was my 14th season of it. And I don't know that I've ever seen a more massive year over year alteration to the Red Sox farm system than I have from 25 into 26, because not only was it those three guys knocking on the door in the form of Anthony, Campbell, Meyer, right? Like, Marcelo there was a like Marcelo by the end of spring training last year, had reestablished himself as kind of spectacular prospect credentials. Just was so good when he was kind of in the rhythm of the game and healthy, and just the talent was great. Yeah. So not only did you have this group of almost major league ready guys who were knocking on the door, who were elite across the game, but they were all position players, right? And now we've gone to a Red Sox farm system where at the top, aside from Arias, you have a bunch of pitchers, and then beneath that you have, and then when it comes to the position players, they are all far from the big leagues. Like, there's a chance for Arias because of the glove to make an impact at the big league level by the end of 2026, depending on the health of the Red Sox and how some different things develop. But otherwise, their position players are coming out of the DSL or coming out of A ball, and it is just a wildly different system now than it was a year ago, and the change is monumental, right? They don't have those guys. They have pitchers who are going to be able to contribute in the near term, and that has been such a clear emphasis for this organization over the course of the last, again, dating back to when Craig Breslow was hired. Like, one of the first things that he did was to acquire a guy like Richard Fitz as a piece in the Alex Verdugo trade to the Yankees, and Fitz ended up being major league depth, and we've just seen we've seen the Red Sox since then just continue to work on reshaping their major league depth, their major league pitching depth, as it extends into AAA, and it is a wildly different system. Although, JJ, it is also interesting to think about, like, Marcelo Meyer lost his prospect eligibility by a few at bats, and it would be off. Marcelo would have been the number one prospect for me had he remained eligible this year. And I would also be curious, if you were to think about how close, where he would fall in the top 100, where that would land.
He'd still be quite high. I think this way to summarize it, how much it changed, looking at last year's top 10 at the prospect handbook, Red Sox top 10. So the top 3 graduated that we just talked about, the big 3. And then another 4 from that top 10 have been traded since then. So there are 3 players, and we just talked about, Arias, who was in there, and we talked about Connolly Early, who was in there, who was number 10. Yoelan Cespedes, who's in the top 30, is the only other member of the top 10 from a year ago who's still eligible to rank on this list. And by the way, you just mentioned, like, it's not just that. Like, Hunter Dobbins was number 11. He's been traded. And Richard Fitz was number 12. And he's been. So it's the top of this system. There's been, from last year, there's been graduations, but there's also been a ton of trades, which does make sense, again, when we talk about this from the standpoint of when you have these guys who are big league ready and their depth, but it's also like 40-man roster construction and some other pieces like that kind of all tie into this. That also means, as we look ahead to next year, I don't expect there to be the same amount of changeover as there was at this time this year. Like, when you look at this top 10, I think there's a number of guys who could still be back again next year. But we would expect that Tolle's going to graduate. I would say that Connolly Early should be expected to graduate. Outside of that, Jake Bennett, who they traded for, but I could see him graduating as well, conceivably. But who kind of fits in that next year? Maybe not, maybe not, but who fits in that group for next year, like, could be the number one? Again, we're going to have graduations. There probably will be some moves. Is Arias the logical one, considering his age and the fact that he's probably not going to make his major league debut in 2026?
Or even if he makes his major league debut, there's a high likelihood that he retains prospect eligibility at the end of it. I mean, if he's making his major league debut, it's probably just amplifying his case as number one by the end of this year, because it would most likely be kind of the September scenario where he's getting his shot. So yeah, I think that Arias is the clear candidate to be number one. That's why he's ranked number 2. But I do think that there's also a group. Kyson Witherspoon is another obvious candidate based on
from 25.
Right, and viewed as the best college right-hander in the 2025 draft. Someone who might end up starting the year in Double-A, and there's I don't think the Red Sox are shy about the positive. It's now evident the Red Sox are among the many organizations that aren't shy about moving players quickly through that first professional season. So it's not outlandish to think that he could be in the same realm as the kind of like Tolle like prospects who shoots through the minors and ends up emerging as number one. So those would be the two most obvious, and that's why they're ranked where they are, right? Like if we assume that Tolle and Early end up kind of aging out of prospect status, then prospects number 2 and 4 in a system are obvious candidates to emerge. There are probably there are a couple that are a little further down that have a chance to really make more considerable jumps, right? That would maybe not be necessarily within the realm of expectation. But I think that the candidates that you would point to there include Juan Valera, who was super impressive last year as a teenager in many respects, super impressive. The ERA looked bad last year, right? Like, but we all get it. ERA is not really the predictive thing that we look for when evaluating prospects at this point. And he was someone who pounded the strike zone as a teenage starting pitcher. He's physically huge, but has enough body control to be able to land strikes while throwing, while topping out like 98, 99 hundo, and and with the components of two pretty good secondary pitches. So he's someone who could make some considerable strides, particularly again, given the strike throwing. Like he'll assert himself with a pretty good floor. And if he's getting to the upper levels by the end of the year as a very young pitcher, he might stand out. Justin Gonzalez has been and will be a fascinating lottery ticket / wild card. He is someone who just had enormous tools and no real game and very little game feel when the Red Sox signed him for very little money out of the Dominican. A few years ago, and he's been fascinating because he hits the ball incredibly hard. He makes really good swing decisions, and he just happens to hit the ball into the ground. And so this is one of the strengths of the Red Sox system. The thing that unlocked Christian Campbell was taking a guy whose approach had been ground ball and line drive heavy and teaching him how to be able to kind of catch the ball, change the contact point a little bit, get the ball in the air and be able to drive it from gap to gap. Gonzalez has huge power potential to the point where, if he is catching the ball, if he's not catching the ball quite as deep, but still has strong enough swing decisions that you accept some swing and miss, while selling out and taking some chances, he could emerge as a pretty fascinating prospect, particularly if he's able to continue to assert himself as a corner outfielder and not just a first base only profile. So that's someone who there's the possibility of huge offensive numbers from him if a few different things click. It's not as high a probability as the other guys.
It's unlikely, but it could.
Yeah, that's the one where the tools are huge and there's an approach underlying it, but there would need to be some transformation to the game and to the offensive approach to allow it to unlock.
You just touched on this. One of the things that the Red Sox obviously have done a good job of is their hitting development kind of seemed like it took some strides. Is that still, like, if you were going to say what are the Red Sox kind of hang their hat on as a farm system, is it that, or is it kind of solid development? Again, we saw the developments of a Tolle, of a Connolly early, of some of these pitchers. Is it becoming a little bit more of a pitcher focused development? Again, obviously the answer is you want to do all of the above. You want to improve hitting, you want to improve defense, you want to improve pitching. But what do you think that they're good at developing?
Yeah, I think that the so-called low-hanging, like, they've done a great job of implementing processes that have allowed them to add power to their players across the board, both position players and pitchers. So, bat speed training, they were, behind Jason Ochard, a former driveline instructor who had a few years as the Phillies hitting coordinator and then was hired to oversee Red Sox hitting development. They've made major across the board gains in terms of bat speed training and getting guys to be able to hit the ball harder. And then they've been able to make huge gains in terms of implementing velocity programs across the organization. And so you see the Payton Tolles of the world kind of disappearing after they're drafted and emerging 8 months later, throwing 5 miles an hour harder. And Payton Tolle isn't the only one for whom that's happening. So they've been able to attack those areas, and then subordinate to that, they've also, like, it's not like they've said, okay, that's enough, like just add power. They've done a really nice job of being thoughtful and intentional about creating systems that develop tools, right? And so I mentioned bat path earlier with regards to Christian Campbell and Justin Gonzalez. That's something where they've had a really, like, they've done a really good job of coaching players up on figuring out, like, how to get to good attack angles with their swings. And Franklin Arias is actually an interesting example of that, because he had been too steep as an 18-year-old, and they were like, well, this isn't really going to, you're gonna hit a lot of pop-ups if you continue this way. And so he ended up with a super flat bat path last year, which explained how he got to these incredible contact numbers, like just no zone swing and miss at all. And so now it's kind of continue to adjust the dials and find something where you're okay getting on that plane with the pitch to be able to drive it into the gaps a little bit more, or maybe clear the fences a little bit more and then if you add a little bit of strength, you're getting some homers out of it. They've been very good about coaching all of these elements. I do think that they have gotten to a point of balanced, of having both position player and pitcher development programs that have been effective in building out tools. And now, there is a game feel element to it that there are a lot of what they do is in these training sessions and training settings. And so if there is a critique of the Red Sox system that you hear most, it is whether or not all of the tools development is translating into games, and particularly on the defensive side of things. But I think that they've heard the criticism, and they recognize a need to tweak some of their programming and some of their training to get players to have better game feel as well.
Well, that's kind of where a big picture look at the Red Sox farm system. For the video portion on YouTube, that's the end of this show. But at the same time, if you are listening on the podcast, or if you want to listen on the podcast, we're going to go on for a little while longer, talk about some of the sleepers in the organization and a little bit kind of the 2026 outlook right after this quick break.